Good morning. This is Chuck Woodall with the task force. I'd like to now introduce the members and guidelines for the reopening business working group. And I want to thank you in advance for your participation in this working group as we begin the work ahead of us. First of all, do we have Alan Johnson with the City of Orlando and Orlando Venues with us?
Present. Present.
Dave George with Darden Restaurants.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dave. Kathy Ransberger with Dr. Phillips.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kathy. How are you? Steve Garrity, Highwoods Properties.
Here.
Alex Lateo, Orlando City Soccer Club.
I have Cesar Lopez on behalf of Alex Lateo.
Brad Gilmore, SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment.
Good morning, I'm here.
Morning. Harold Mills, BMD Ventures LLC. Harold Mills. So Harold, if you're on the line and we can't hear you, just on the chat, just type that you're here so we'll know. Thomas Maz Loom, Walt Disney World Resort.
Good morning, Chuck.
Good morning. Todd Souders, Wawa.
Yes, good morning.
Morning. Dan Wilcox, YMCA of Central Florida.
Good morning, Chuck.
Morning. And Rich, did I say this right? Costellas, Universal Orlando.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, and you said we had a couple other people to add to the agenda who weren't here. Eric?
Yeah, Chuck, we have just a few people we added this morning. So if they can identify themselves, they have not been called on already, just so we can have that for the record.
Yeah,
Alex,
Chuck.
we'll start with you.
Alex Martins is here. Good morning.
Morning, Alex.
Barbara
And
Jenkins
Georgia
here.
Gale. And Georgia Gale is here.
And Georgia go. Okay. Any other people who we did not acknowledge that are on the guidelines subcommittee?
Because this is Harold Mills. I just joined. So.
Okay. Thank you, Harold.
I'm hoping you heard Barbara Jenkins.
Yes,
did.
ma'am. We did. Barbara Jenkins is acknowledged. Thank you.
And John Henry, you're here with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you're next, John.
Okay. Do I need to enter? Okay. This is John Henry, the owner of J. Henry's Barbershop here in downtown Orlando. I'm the co-chair person, along with Chuck. In an effort to comply with the CDC social distancing guidelines for the safety of residents and task force members, the Economic Recovery Task Force guideline reopening business work groups will conduct meetings virtually. Orange County remains committed to provide an alternative platform for residents to have the opportunity to submit their comments. I will ask Orange County staff to read the public comments we received online and add it to the public records. Please note public comments received that do not include the required information will not be read. Comments that extend beyond the set time limit will not be read in its entirety. However, residents' entire comments will be entered into the public record. Please note that the allocated to individuals for public comments via online submission may be reduced from the normal 3 minutes based on the number of speakers developed.
Do we have any public comment?
Chuck and Jay Henry, we have no public comment that's been submitted for this specific subgroup task force. Before we do move forward, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items for our participants. Just to take extra care in when you're not speaking and or presenting to mute your phone, especially those who have called in with just their phone. That'll help us reduce the feedback and lessen the load on our ISS staff on trying to ensure that the feed is live and that it's clean and optimal as possible. No texting each other during this meeting. This is a sunshine meeting. And so if you need to ask a question and or be recognized as a part of our discussion, please use the chat function. We've set this up where everyone will chat everyone at the same time so that we don't have any private chats so that we can comply with sunshine laws. And then other than that, we'll have Q&A portions sprinkled out throughout our agenda today. And if you could hold the questions and or just send them in the chat, our team here will help the co-chairs field those questions at the appropriate time. And I'll give that back over to you, Chuck and Jay.
Yeah, so our priorities are to categorize the business groups and to develop guidelines in a guideline format. We've already taken the initiative, and Lucas, do you have that or does Eric have that? Because I'd like to bring that up. What we've started working on is placing different types of businesses into categories, coming up with our own guidelines. We've reviewed the guidelines from Louisiana. We've reviewed the guidelines from Nashville, and we put together our own format for guidelines. And here it is on the screen. So
Chuck, I just pulled that up for you.
Yeah, and I can't scroll that. You'll have to scroll that, right?
Yes, sir. I'll scroll it.
So, we started off with corporate guidelines for offices. And what you'll see resonate through this is there's a lot of commonality in PPE, which today with the mayor, I want to point that out because, what we've designed for most businesses to open up is going to require, in general, face mask, hand sanitizer, and thermometers for temperature checks, things like that really kind of will go through the various different industries. And so people are going to have to prepare for that. What we've started is a working draft. We'd like to build upon that. If you see things that look wrong, let's talk about it. If you see things that we need to add, let's talk about that. And the purpose of having different business groups, and I'd like you guys to weigh in, is where you think you would be the most helpful in refining this. For instance, I got on the phone the other day with the president of the Wyndham, Ritz-Carlton, Marriott, and Westgate and Marriott Vacation Club to come up with guidelines for the hotel industry and timeshare. And we collaborated over the weekend and came up with guidelines for them. And, we own a restaurant personally. So, I just took my knowledge on that and what I have with various different tenants. But I'm not an expert in any or all of the categories, but I think we've done a decent job getting started on this. And then as we compared these to the Nashville guidelines, we compared these to Louisiana, I think we've actually done a better job. So if we could, you've already seen what's on the screen, and let's scroll down where we can read the complete restaurant one if you could. So what we've done is we've come up, go up a little bit just so I get the, no, the other way. Keep going, right there. So what we've done is we've come up with what we think are guidelines and also mandates. And for instance, with restaurants, you'll see below that we have hand sanitizer at every table, but we would encourage disposable menus, but not require it because lots of restaurants won't be able to meet that criteria just because of the nature of the restaurant. But if they have hand sanitizer on the table, you'd be able to hold a menu and then clean your hands afterward. Encouraging continuing takeout online orders, touchless sanitizer at entry. We originally had that as a mandate, but some businesses, one, may not be able to afford it, and two, they may be difficult to get a hold of. But we'd recommend, like when you walk in a restaurant, you grab the front door, you walk in, sanitize your hands. Phase 1 and 2, staff who are 65 and older, which everybody you're hearing in the news yesterday, today, are the highest of risk. We've already heard that, are still encouraged to stay at home. Mandates, hand sanitizer at every table, hand sanitizer at, I'm not going to read every one of these for all the categories. I'm just going to go through this one to show you our thoughts. Hand sanitizer at the entry, be in plain visible sight. So once again, once you enter, you can clean your hands. All employees required to wear face mask. Temperature checks to staff prior to shift. They have a temperature of above 100.4. They're not allowed to work. All employees with flu-like symptoms are advised to stay home. Doors to be wiped regularly. All staff behind counters must wear gloves, except for bartenders. Bartenders sanitize hands after making each drink order, and seated tables to be 6 foot apart. And this is in phase 1 to limit the restaurant to 50%, and in phase 2 to limit it to 75%. Now, Lucas, if you'll just slowly scroll through the guidelines for the different categories that we have here, where people can glance at them. And I think we've circulated these, and if we haven't, we can circulate them to all the members on the task force. Hair salons, which are become very important to my wife at this point. Same type of things, just sanitizing, temperature checks. And you'll see that theme throughout most of these. As we talk to the hotel people, we're referring for the hotels to refer back to spas. This guidelines here for spas to refer back to our guidelines for restaurants and the things that are common to retail shops, and then they'll have their own specific guidelines. You can keep scrolling through this.
And Chuck, I'll email a copy of this to all the participants here shortly. So when you get to the malls, we're
mandating that the entry doors are either automated or they have an attendant who opens the doors because hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people enter the mall. Interior stores of the mall keep their doors open or automated so people don't have to touch the handles, things like that. Scrolling. A lot of this information, the way we came across it is, our own knowledge because we have a couple hundred tenants, but also collaborating with our staff here, on things like child care and things like that. And we also, for the most part, followed the presidential guidelines of opening. Once we get in the discussion in a minute, I want to bring up some thoughts on that versus what the governor's been saying. Go and scroll through the rest of it, Lucas. We did classify bars of less than 2,000 square foot because we think there's a clear differentiation of small bars versus a larger club. And so we had two different categories for those. Gas stations, nobody's ever talked about them, but everybody pulls up to the pump. We think it should be mandated that they have sanitizer at every pump. I don't know legally how that works with the county, a guideline to have wipes at pumps. And like I said, the hotels were already collaborated on with the group that I mentioned. Now in theme parks, and once again, I am in no means an expert here, but we did think there was a difference between small theme parks. We put examples, Topgolf, Fun Spot, Andretti, Icon, Gatorland versus Disney, Universal, and SeaWorld needs to be added to that category. But there's a difference between them. And as far as the opening of those, I'm not sure how that's going to be governed, but these are our recommendations. And we have dentistry, but we should also probably add other medical type offices, chiropractors, and things like that. But a lot of those businesses already have these type of measures that they have. So I don't know if we really need to address all those. But as we go through it, we need to come up with business groups. Lucas, you can take that off the screen now. Thank you. So, things like I didn't address the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center. I didn't address the Amway Center. I know there's various thoughts on that. I know what the governor said in California. I personally have had some frustration with our governor that he hasn't come out with any guidelines of any sort yet. We came out with these, like I said, following a couple other states and also following the president's lead on the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. I've heard the governor state that he doesn't think health clubs may necessarily open in phase 1, but the national guidelines have health clubs opening in phase 1, and I think they could. And the idea of this task force is to figure how we get people working again. And Roseanne, I know you and I talked yesterday about the governor. We were hoping he would have said something yesterday about what his timing was, and he didn't. And I got a little frustrated today again when I heard he's flying up to Washington, D.C. And I just know from the business community, a lot of us are on the call, that the business community is getting extremely frustrated, not having any direction. We've already had 2 weeks of downward trend, which meets the national guidelines. And I'm surprised the governor didn't come out yesterday and say, once his order expires, he's going to leave it up to the local governments to make a decision. I personally think, since we've met the national criteria of a 2-week downward trend, that the date in my head seems like May 11th, because I know it's going to take businesses at least a week to 10 days to be able to get the personal protection equipment to to implement what we're recommending for guidelines. My goal would be to have the guidelines finished by Friday, Saturday at the latest, if we could have everything in by Friday. That's really going to be part of the open discussion, but I'd like to know who would like to be part of what groups, or how you think you can add to what I've started or what I may be missing.
Chuck, if I can just respond, this is Roseanne.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
I spoke with the governor's office this morning, and they're going to let me know mid-morning today whether the governor will announce his guidelines today or tomorrow. So we have our meeting at 2:30 of the full task force, and we should have a better idea of if the guidelines will come out today or tomorrow by that time.
And then, Roseanne, would you picture that once we get the governor's guidelines, that we incorporate them as appropriate into ours, and then have a discussion on that? Because I think there's some things that are going to apply to Central Florida or not apply to Central Florida that may be in his guidelines.
We will incorporate the governor's guidelines. We're thinking they're going to be base guidelines, and perhaps maybe he will look for some local input into or how we do the rest. But we really don't know for sure at this point. That's why we have a meeting scheduled for today, and then we have another one scheduled for Friday. You'll be getting a meeting invitation for that for the full task force. So as you mentioned, our goal is, because that executive order expires on Thursday, and how we proceed from there is really important to our community. So that's why we're having a lot of meetings this week. You're right, Chuck. We need guidelines developed for our own community, and then we'll have a meeting on Friday deciding how to move forward.
Do we have any indication of what the governor thinks would be the opening date, or is he going to let the individual counties figure what's their appropriate opening date, knowing that South Florida may be different than Orlando?
We have no idea at this point.
Okay, so I would imagine he'll give us indication before his order expires, I would hope.
Yes, so if he allows his order to expire on Friday without any extension, then it would be then the local counties could do their own executive order. That's kind of how we got into this. Was, remember, Orange County did our executive order, and then the state came behind us and superseded the counties. So at this point, we're not sure whether the governor will extend the order, or he'll let it expire and let the counties move forward with their own individual executive orders. We're not sure what the process is going to be, but we'll know more later today.
And in anticipation of that, that's why my goal was to try to have this complete by Friday or Saturday, because even if the governor lets his order expire on Thursday, there's no way restaurants, health clubs, hair salons, nail salons can be prepared in one day with these guidelines. And that's why I thought the 11th, a week from Monday, would be an appropriate date, because we could get these guidelines out on Monday the 4th and give businesses a week to acquire those PPE things that they would need to open up in a safe manner.
Chuck, I have a quick question for you, if you don't mind. This is Harold Mills. My question is, there's a significant portion of the community that's considered essential and is already working. They're obviously not working under these recommended mandates. Is it our intent to sort of retroactively or sort of say that you now have to move forward with these mandates? And any thoughts on how we might manage through that?
Well, we discussed that yesterday, and what's considered essential, they've kind of figured their way through this. Like Publix has installed sneeze guards, they have directions on aisles, they have spacing already in place. And so we're really directing it, and it's a good discussion point on businesses that have not yet opened. And it's really to give the public not only the safety, but the comfort that I know if I go to Eddie V's versus Ruth's Chris versus McDonald's, that I'm going to expect the same type of care, for the people behind the counter and taking care of their staff, that everybody isn't just kind of on their own doing their own thing and having the public determine which place is safe to go, that they know there's going to be standards implemented at every place they go to. Yeah, and I'm curious to know from Roseanne and Eric what they think, but I just think at this point to go to Publix and Home Depot and tell them what to do after they've been doing it for a period of time may not make as much sense as focusing on those businesses that have not been opened and don't necessarily have any standards.
Thank you, Chuck. And I can just tell you here at Orange County, we have been open with a reduced staff. And I think what was done at the beginning was recommendations made as far as telecommuting, reduced staff. So those who are open have made accommodations. And I think that needs to be included in what you're doing is some of the guidelines that we followed. I believe the governor encouraged the hand sanitation, the facial coverings, if you're in a room with where you can't do social distancing. So those are some of the guidelines that we can look at moving forward that have been best practices by some of these businesses that have stayed open. And I know we have Wawa on the line right now, and you have stayed open. And I don't know if Wawa, you want to make any kind of comment?
So, yeah.
Todd Souders is on the line.
Yeah, Todd Souders here. Hope you can all hear me. So yes, we've been open constantly through, made many of the changes you have on the list there of hand sanitizer, face masks, cleaning. I think all those are extremely important, and they're kind of already, there's nothing on the list other than the sanitizer at the pumps, which we clean the pumps, but we're also looking to install hand sanitizer there that we're not already doing from that perspective.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. I think the hand sanitizer is important aside from this COVID thing. I can't tell you how many people I know probably on this call, even though you clean the pumps regularly, I pull up right behind somebody else and as soon as I get in my car, I always put sanitizer back on my hands after going to the gas pumps. It'd be nice if they were actually at the gas pump, and Wawa does a great job with everything.
Yeah, we've been trying to get those. Supply is obviously the big question there, and then also to secure them, because in many situations we've had early on, we were having people steal the toilet paper out of the restrooms, believe it or not. So we want to make sure it's there and there all the time. And if something does happen to it, we can easily replace it for sure. So that's definitely on our list.
And Roseanne, my wife and I had a debate over this, that, she looked at the standards as I was putting them together, and she said, well, a lot of people aren't going to be able to get those things because the availability is sparse. And I know there's a task force to come up with the PPE, but, where we kind of debated on this is I said, well, so one restaurant should have standards and the next one doesn't. If you don't require these standards, then nobody's going to do it, and then the public won't feel safe going to them. So even though it may be difficult to get sanitizer, people need to do that to safely open. I'll feel, if I go into a restaurant with sanitizer and everybody's wearing masks behind the counter preparing the food and delivering the food to my table, I'm going to feel a lot better than going to a restaurant that someone's not implementing any of those. And I know it's a burden to put on the restaurants, and that's why I've had this frustration about the time, is because we do need to give the different businesses, hair salons, nail salons, restaurants, et cetera, the time to be able to go acquire these things, to be able to operate under these standards that we're putting on.
Good point, Chuck. And we do have a business readiness committee working group, and we have a lot of small businesses on that, because we do realize having appropriate supplies is going to be a challenge for some of these smaller organizations. So yes, there's a whole team that is starting to meet tomorrow. We'll meet every day this week that will be looking at the supplies necessary, not only supplies, but the training of employees, the policies and procedures. Many of the organizations on this phone call have all of those in place. Some of these smaller organizations do not, and that's why we want to be able to share best practices. I do want to announce that the mayor will be joining us at some point during this call and be available to answer any questions. And I'm not sure if Mayor Jennings, if you are on right now, or he will be joining us sometime this morning. Mayor?
The mayor's not on yet, but he will be on shortly.
Great, thank you.
While we're waiting for the mayor, you see the categories I've come up with. Please tell me who on the call thinks they could be helpful on adding to those categories. And, and Kathy and Alex, we haven't addressed, and like I said, I have no knowledge on how to address the opening of a performing arts center, a soccer stadium, an Amway Center, but that has to be discussed, and we got to figure out what's going to happen with that. I know California said they're not going to have any large venue events until there's a vaccine.
Yes.
That's dramatic, but I don't know what the reality of that is.
Actually, what's interesting is the economics don't work for touring production. And if you have your own content, there's other ways that you probably can manage attendance. And Alex and I have talked about what Orlando City Soccer may be approaching. But for touring work, the economics don't work for the artist or for the tour or even for the venue. And so I was curious. There's 3 levels that have been discussed. I'm wondering if there's a 4th level and a 5th level. The 3 levels nationwide, these big venues don't actually fit in those 3 at all. And when they talk about a vaccination, maybe our medical experts can participate in this, is, the dynamics of what's required has changed over time. So initially it was 6 feet, then it was a mask, and then it was mask and 6 feet. And so, if there's a variation where there could be maybe a level 4 and then level 5 could be maybe a vaccination. I know that's a bigger conversation, but it's something that to at least plan 18 months or a year to 18 months is difficult to manage. Right now, we still have shows that are booked, and Alan Johnson might jump in on this too. There's shows booking, but they're rolling. Broadway is canceling in the fall. We have some Broadway there, but throughout the country, the economics just don't work, and so that's a challenge. And I look forward to larger conversation with both Alex Martins and Alan and Alex, and even the theme parks. They have the same type of venues, and so but the challenge is if you control your own content, you can have variables, but if you don't control your content, you don't.
And Alex, if you could weigh in on this too, because for instance, if California is going to allow basketball games to be played with an audience, how does that affect Orlando and in different municipalities?
Yeah, we're talking about that as a league, Chuck, and we really don't have all the answers yet. We're looking at a variety of different ways that we would come back and play, not the least of which is, potentially playing in one location in a bubble, so to speak, where all of our teams go to one specific city and play out the rest of the season in playoffs there. So, we really haven't come to the exact answer. I mean, I'm sure you saw in the last couple of days, the directives for the beginning of reopening of training facilities. And even in that case, we're going to have some states that are not going to be open yet. And the league is still determining how those players and those teams will be able to get back to training if those states have not reopened yet. So, it's a really fluid and dynamic situation for us right now. But for us as a league, it seems pretty clear that when we do get back to playing games, we're not going to be playing in front of fans immediately. We'll be playing those games for television. And, the discussion is really going to be around when the next season will it be safe enough to gather, crowds of 10 and 20,000 people in the same location, and for them to be safe and to feel safe. So it's really evolving right now. From our league standpoint, I know all the leagues are really trying to evaluate, based on different states not being open and other states being open. So this is a situation that we're discussing on a daily basis as a league.
And Kathy, to your point, like traveling shows, the sports do the same thing. That's why we didn't try to weigh in on that, because I don't think there is an answer for that right now. I think that's a discussion to be had months from now when there's therapeutics or vaccines are on the horizon, and your industry understands that. And once again, even with Disney, SeaWorld, and the other parks, we put in some guidance, but truthfully, they're going to make those decisions and figure that out much better than probably we ever could. Because I'm not going to go there until I feel safe going there, because I don't want to touch, the rides that 1,000 people have touched. I think, I tried to break out the Topgolfs of the world, the Andretti's, the smaller ones, because those are smaller enterprises that can be managed easier. You can control capacity better. they're not bringing in 20, 40, 50,000 people a day. They're much smaller venues, and that's why we put those as a separate category. But yeah, the theme parks are a complete different discussion. And I can tell you from everybody on International Drive, we have a lot of tenants on iDrive. They're all quite nervous, and when we know when Disney's going to open up, who knows? But until Disney and Universal open up, those businesses down there are going to suffer because they don't have the tourists. And Roseanne and Eric, I did provide you guidelines, for the convention center, but even opening up the convention center would, I'm sure until there's a vaccine, be limited size shows and carried on in a different manner than what we're used to having conventions at. So those are, I think, much bigger conversations to have, like you said, Kathy, in a phase 4 or 5. But the other businesses that we do on a day-to-day basis are really things that we're focused on right this second. And we're going to need some direction from the county on how to deal with those larger venues. And whoever can add input for these categories, or if I'm missing one, for instance, warehouses were provided on a list the other day, but they're already an open business, and I think they've already got their own protocols. I don't know if it's necessary for us to address it, but the categories on here, the purpose was to get some business groups together, and I don't know who wants to group together if we just do it in this format, because we're going to visit every day for an hour. And if you can have discussions with colleagues and contemporaries around Central Florida and share these with them, and we're trying to get community weigh in on this, on something that's fair and will work and make the community feel safe. And if we're missing things, or if we need to delete things, that's what this forum is, to come up with something that works for everybody.
Yeah, I would just add in, Chuck, we've had a number of people reaching out to us, wanting to be a part of the task force, thinking that their industry may or may not be represented. So the ability to go out, as Chuck has done with the hospitality industry, go out and reach out to the different business groups and bring in that outside expertise, bring it back to the group. That's how we can get some others involved as well, as they can. For example, a real estate industry, I know they're considered essential right now, but they wanted a seat at the table. We just want to make sure we're capturing all the input from as many industries as possible, so that we can make sure that we're getting feedback from the folks that are working within those industries in the community. So if we set up folks on this work group that'll take different businesses and go out and meet with those folks and bring the information back, I think that might be a good way to proceed. And we just want to make sure, as Chuck said, is there anything we're missing? Obviously this was a draft that he put together and did a great job. Are there things that we're missing that need to be on there? And I'm sure we'll also, this is being televised, get some public comments on that from folks that are watching on TV or on their computer.
And if you'll look it over, and when we rejoin tomorrow, tell us what comments you have, and we'll continue to build on that. And the goal would be Friday or Saturday to circulate something that would be somewhat of a final document that everybody would bless and say, this makes sense. And if it's too onerous in one category, let us know so we can address it. And the goal is to get a document by the end of the week, so we can get something out that will go to the public, that they know how to reopen their business.
Yeah, I think, Chuck, also something that would be very, very helpful, and it was mentioned last week, was the thought of going from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 for businesses that might not fit in a category, or they're very, very similar to categories, so they can then plan. It's what you said early on. If we roll this out, then they have prep time, then they can get their employees back, then they can train their employees for the new normal. But if it's 3 weeks, I think what I heard last week, it's 2 weeks and then a week of research, and then level 2 comes in 3 weeks after you begin level 1, if the data supports that. If that's still the case, I think that's something that a lot of industries that might not be specific to this, and I think we should try to cover all of them. But if they don't, they can figure out how they can and may and plan for level 2 or level 3. So, for instance, our business and our venue, we have to figure out something else to stay relevant if we're going to be closed for a year or less than a year whenever touring comes back. And so smaller components for my business, if you can fit in there, that's great. But to your point, real estate and all the camps, classes, all those others that aren't specific yet identified, they might be able to file other guidelines throughout the phased process.
And Roseanne, you and I discussed yesterday, about that third week. And I think you want to have discussion on this call about that, whether follow the national guidelines of 2 weeks and then go to the next phase 2, or have that week in between.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. I had an opportunity to talk to Dr. Pino of the Department of Health yesterday and the other physicians, and we're going to have that discussion with the full task force later today. And what the Department of Health is looking for is some period of time. Is it a week? Is it a few days between phase 1 and phase 2, where we have the data, we can evaluate it, and then we can assure the community that we have the transparency to demonstrate to them that we're moving to the next phase. And they're not sure. A week might be long, and maybe it can be shortened, but Dr. Pino is going to address that later today at our full task force meeting. What does that look like? And then he's also looking at what metrics, so that the community, as a lot of this is consumer confidence, and how can the community feel confident going out? They feel safe leaving their homes and going to these venues. And I think that comes from, you see the health monitoring, we see your tracking, continue to tracking the cases and the hospitalizations. That's going to be really important for us to move forward. And that will be discussed later today. One thing I did want to mention addressing the phases is that, and I think you pointed out in your restaurants, that you can use capacity to go ahead and manage that social distancing. And then also we're looking at, so if you have hotels throughout Orange County, that you keep all the hotels kind of in category, and then restaurants and retail. So you might have these bigger venues that have a few of those things all on one site. Well, let's not penalize them because they have a few things all on one site. Is there a way, to Kathy's point, where you can give them an opportunity? Let's say Kathy wanted to open a restaurant in her rooftop. It's a dream, okay. But it might be an opportunity for her to replace some of that lost revenue. And so that's what we're looking at, is let's look at these broad criteria across the whole Orange County.
And Roseanne, just to bounce back to the 7-day period for a moment, I watch those briefings ad nauseum every day, but the one thing that I've heard questions asked from reporters a lot is going back to where you were, going back on a lockdown. I think the one thing the 7 days, and I think it was actually a good idea, gives us is the ability not to have to go into a phase 2 and say, oh, gee, things are spiraling out a little bit. Let's go back to phase 1. I think it gives us that buffer to say phase 1 is still heading the right direction. We can hit the pause button if it's not and stay there. But if things are going the right direction, then go into phase 2, versus getting into phase 2 and then finding out cases are increasing, you're getting spikes, and then having to do a shutdown or revert back to a phase 1. I just think it might be a smoother transition. A week, based on what we've done, is not that long of a time, going from 50 to 75% capacity and the changes. But at least it's a time to monitor where we could be a third or fourth day into it and say, look, we need to pause and stay at phase 1 for 2 more weeks or a week more, versus bouncing back. I just think it might be hard for businesses to manage that if that were to happen.
I know a lot of this is driven by medical data. I was curious to know if there's a thought or maybe a case to be made, is if we should do some consumer surveying for any of this. So attendance. Right now, we're actually in the process of doing some audience attendance surveying, just to find out where their confidence level would be once supported with the health data that allows them to be engaged in any of the businesses. So I don't know if we have any surveying entity, or maybe that's something we could consider if you think that data is useful for making some of these decisions.
I think some of it also, Kathy, is going to come from that there's a natural attrition here that I think the day we open, there's some pent up demand. People want to go out, but I think the public too is going to be cautious in general. The public's going to have to feel comfortable. I don't think you would see any restaurant or anything full the first day it opens, because I know from my friendship groups, a lot of people are like, well, I'm staying home for another month. And some people are, I'm ready to go out. I think, some of what we do is going to be just governed by the community in itself, but any type of input we can get, I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if Eric or Roseanne is familiar with the way to survey of this. But I think hopefully this whole task force that we're doing now is a survey that the public can weigh in on what we're doing. They can add their input. They can comment on what we're doing, and what Eric circulated, our guidelines, is out to the public right now. So, we are looking for their comment.
This is Steve Garrity. What's the expectation of the establishments cleaning their facilities if they do get a positive hit?
Well, I guess it's hard to determine where someone's going to get a positive hit. We're trying to establish guidelines that everybody sanitizes regularly, whether they have a hit or not, that the same level of sanitization is always carried.
So what we've been doing at, we own 30% of the downtown market, and our buildings have remained opened for the essential workers, and the non-essential workers will wait for the green light for those folks to join us. But we're ready, and the buildings have been opened, and it'll be interesting to see as we get that green light for folks to come back to the buildings, just to get a sense on that volume of positives that could occur. We're poised and ready to deploy cleaning folks to continue to clean the buildings. But that's something I think we just need to make sure that the establishments are familiar with those resources that are out there. Somehow we need to make sure that on a daily, nightly, and if there is a positive hit, they understand what they can do and should do to make their establishment clean and ready for the patrons in the next day.
Yeah, and in general, Steve, I think what we're trying to express is all businesses have to sanitize all the time, because if I go to my office building and then I go to Four Rivers for lunch and then I go get my haircut, at the end of the day, 2 days later, if I'm infected, I don't know where I got it from. And so I think you have to maintain that level of sanitization until we get through this.
Souders here. So if we have a positive case, you may want to consider some type of wording in there. We do a professional deep cleaning, not just the staff, which come in and totally deep clean the store, shut it down, deep clean it. Thank God we haven't had to do that hardly at all down in Florida. But we might want to consider something in there, because what we have seen is the professional deep cleaning is definitely a step ahead, because they have, all the chemicals, they're getting into all the nooks and crannies and everything. You just maybe consider that as we come up with kind of a mandate there.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Did the mayor join us yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes.
This is Thomas Maslum. If I could make 3 recommendations, perhaps, for consideration, specifically about hospitality. Love what you presented. Can I make a recommendation in terms of, it's my understanding that some of the associations, such as the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, in partnership with the National Restaurant Association, as well as the American Hotel Associations, have developed very good, comprehensive, and detailed guidance standards for a proposed hospitality reopening. Can we perhaps just make sure we have a way of comparing what is currently proposed with these guidelines, so that we don't contradict each other, and or make sure that that they somewhat match, because there was a lot of good work done for these associations on a state and on a national level. So that's just one recommendation that I have. The secondary thing is what I wanted to say, and Alex reminded me of this, was in the different phases, as you can imagine, I would think that sports events, for example, with and without spectators, would fall in different phases. And that just led me to one of the points that I wanted to recommend, perhaps, and that is that this structured phased approach should perhaps be considered, that it's based on the type of public health measures that are needed to ensure a safe guest and workers environment, and not only, or perhaps not on the specific type of business or service. What I mean by that is, I don't think we should make assumptions that certain businesses cannot adopt if they're given clear guidelines. So many businesses, and I think of ours, we have the ability to radically change our operations based on very specific health guidelines, rather than saying, this business can only be in phase 3 and this business is in phase 1. If the businesses know what the health measures are needed and what those guidelines are, businesses have the ability to adapt to those guidelines and make a choice whether they want to open under these guidelines or not. So it's just a recommendation I wanted to put out there.
No, I think that's excellent, because at the end of the day, Walt Disney can tell the county, or SeaWorld can tell the county much better how they can operate in a safe condition in which their guests want to attend than any of us could ever dictate that to them. And I agree, it shouldn't be at some certain phase that they should present something that ultimately would be reviewed by the county. They would say, yes, this makes sense for you to operate in this manner. And they're going to be able to do that a lot better than we can. And then to your comment about the National Restaurant Association, if you can, and anybody, if you have any comments, if you can forward them to Eric, he's been sending me things from other jurisdictions that we've been incorporating. If you can send it to Eric, and then Eric can send it to me, and then I'll go through it. I read it all, and then I'll include it or do it as an attachment or an addendum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chuck and Thomas, thank you. Good point about the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association. In fact, Carrie Barnes has reached out, and she is their local person here, and we can have her work with this subcommittee. And I believe that they are presenting that's part of what's coming out of the state, is that they've been working with the state and on guidelines for hospitality. So we will certainly make sure that we include Carrie and try and get her on our next call.
That'd be great.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes.
Considered, in addition,
This is Dan Wilcox with the Y.
Health data. Have we considered utilizing, so cell phone movement data is very readily available. And I've saw a lot of reports over the last month about how people aren't moving. I guess my point there is, can we tell along the way as we go through week 1, week 2, and week 3 if people are actually going out? And if they're not, and we're not seeing results, it's different than if they all are going out or we're seeing results. I know you can tell that by the business level, but it might be an additional point. I know it's not on our committee, but something to maybe consider.
And I am familiar with that technology, but I'm not familiar with how to tap into that technology. So if someone knows how to tap into that technology, I think it's excellent information to know how much traffic. You can do it on Google Maps. You see who's moving around, but it's other than that, I don't know how to tap into that technology.
I can get you information on that over to you from our corporate office. We utilize it.
Now, that'd be interesting analytics to see that. I think you're going to just naturally see it when you go to a restaurant. You see, for instance, you guys know I own a restaurant, Slate, on Sand Lake Road. Even when we open back up at 50%, I am curious if we can fill it 50%. As we hit, before we closed down, we were getting very minimal tables. As the fear was in the market, we would have just a handful of tables a night. And I actually decided to shut the restaurant down before we were told to shut it down, because you could see handwriting on the wall and it wasn't economically feasible. So I'm really curious to see what level people will go out. I think it's going to take time before these businesses are firing on all cylinders again. I think even though we set it at 50% then 75%, I think the market's going to naturally dictate maybe even levels that are less than that. We may set 75%, but I think a lot of people won't be able to achieve that. While we're waiting for the mayor, just to slightly jump ahead, we do have meetings scheduled for 9 a.m. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week. And then any information that you have or ideas you have, if you can send them to Eric and he'll forward them to me. I'm going to try to use one set of, one format as a building block, just so there's not a whole bunch of different ones. But, and that's what I did with the hotels that we talked to. It just will make it a little bit easier to build upon. So I'll read anything and incorporate it and bring it up for discussion at our next meeting, different things that do come in. Any other conversations? Anybody else want to talk about anything?
Chuck, this is Dave George from Darden.
Hi, Dave.
Good morning. Just so you know, I have access to every single state and county that has submitted their guidelines. And I don't want to overwhelm you with information, but I've got the guidelines as recommended by Georgia, Tennessee, Iowa, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, Arkansas, so on and so on. So I can get copies of those informations and of all those guidances, the ones that have been approved and that are recommended. So I can share that with you so you have a plethora of information as to what's going on around the country.
Dave, can I ask a favor of you? And instead of sending me all that information, which I've read through a lot of them already, can you look at the guidelines that we did for restaurants and then compare those guidelines? Because you're by far the expert on restaurants, and tell us what we're missing, what we should add to our guidelines or what we should take away. There's a theme as I've read through all of these, and they're very similar. And so we've come up with these restaurant guidelines, but there may be, I don't know if it's 20 bullet points that need to be added or 3 or 2 taken away. But if you could look at it and come back with your recommendation and provide that to Eric, you've by far got the largest restaurant presence of any operator.
Absolutely. I'll make those recommendations by the end of today and get them to Eric. We have 145 restaurants open in Georgia and Tennessee that were open yesterday. So we're starting to get a feel for the flow of activity and how many people came out. And I was surprised that it was smooth and slow, but we still saw a reasonable number of people. So I can give you that information, and I'll get you the details that I think we should recommend based on the current list that you have.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And anybody else with any other categories like Dave that can bring that type of knowledge to the table would be great to have. Whether it's a hair salon, a nail salon, anything that's on the list or something that we may be missing from that list. Like still doing have things in the office that we're missing that you could bring to it. And John, certainly you've got a barbershop, things that we need to add to it.
Yes, Chuck, I was thinking while you was talking about the barbershop, my ideas was to have a sign-in list for the customers. They put their phone number on the sign-in list outside, of course. And once we go down the list while they're sitting out in their vehicles, we could probably call them or text them the same way you do at the driver's license office when you make an appointment. I think this will be pretty effective. Also, let them know that we need to have something in place for the barbers to be prepared before we open, like a little demonstration or something that can give the barbers in the barbershop an ample amount of time to be prepared. Because one thing I don't like to be unorganized in front of customers. So I think it's very important that we can have something in place where I can get with my staff and we could kind of go by the guidelines that we have in place so everybody will be aware of what's going on. But there's nothing worse, like I said before, of walking into an establishment and everybody that's working in the establishment is not on the same page because they're unprepared. And it shows a bad sign, and customers kind of get a little agitated when they see stuff like that. So having said that, I was thinking about in today's society with the young people, maybe a YouTube video or something set aside for barbershops or hair salons or restaurants or whatever that one could go to and say, hey, well, let me just Google this or go on YouTube and find out what are some of the guidelines or requirements that I could follow so I can be in compliance with that county or the city or state that they're asking. So these are some of the ideas. Also, I want the barbers in my shop to have on masks, wear gloves, continue to sanitize and clean their area. Also, I was thinking about having some disposable barber capes that we put around the customers. They have those that I was looking online last night to order some of those. So once we put them around the customers, the drapes, we can throw them in the garbage can along with the gloves that we use. So I think that's something that could be really, really effective. And a lot of customers, once they see you're following these different types of guidelines, business can kind of escalate a little bit as opposed to not following the guidelines. A lot of customers are kind of stay away from businesses that's not complying to the safety for the clients, if you will.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of businesses like yours that have to determine their best practices. Like I know Marriott has their own guidelines, and they'll take what we've done and they'll amplify it and make it much bigger. I do think it's a good idea that we should add to the list, and I've seen other jurisdictions adding by appointment only, whether it's a hair salon, nail salon, or a barber shop, and then you can set the appointments, and you can even put on your door by appointment only, and they can call up. You may have an appointment in 10 minutes, and they come back in 10 minutes, but by appointment only would handle, you know, most of that waiting outside and things like that.
This is Steve Garrity. Would it be unreasonable to request prepayment or Venmo or some sort of payment, not in person, but through you know, other resources?
Well, I personally, and I'm curious to other people on the group, I don't really think that's me. I don't think that's government business to get into that. I think that that's a best practice of an operator to determine. I mean, our job is really just trying to figure out what's going to be, trying to weigh health and livelihood together, come up with that perfect balance. But, you know, I've tried to, with my guidelines, for instance, when I talk to the hotels, is keeping government regulation out of their business itself, but just looking out for the public for health and safety.
I agree.
Anybody else?
Hey, Chuck. Yeah, Chuck, this is Dan Wilcox.
Hi, Dan.
Listen, we're working both here locally with health and wellness facilities as well as nationally with our 2,600 locations is how to reopen. So I'm happy to work in that category to bring the standards that we've already done in some of the states to reopen some of our locations.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. So, you know, we do have a category for gyms on there. If you could go down and just tell us what we're missing. And I know, for instance, we got into the conversation with the hotels. You may, as YMCA, have a booklet that's 20 pages long on how to govern all your employees. What I've been trying not to do, and I did look at the other states, is not come up with a 30-page manual for every category, but to come up with the bullet points of what they need to do, but yet let the operators figure out the best way to implement those procedures. You know, I don't need, for instance, I was talking with one of the hotels and it's like, well, you know, we should tell them how to put on face masks. And I'm like, that should be for the operator to do, to instruct their employees and tell them how to run their business and how to do things properly and how often to change masks. You know, we're not coming up with a complete guideline book of, you know, that you should change mask every 2 hours and things like that they're required to wear a mask, but the businesses themselves have to figure out those procedures. And there's plenty of stuff on the internet that tells you about, just like you just talked about, John, and those type of different things. But this is more or less as we come in from a customer, and I walk in a restaurant and I see people who are handling my food behind the counter wearing gloves and wearing masks. I know they're following a procedure, but I just don't think we have the time or the resources to tell everybody how to properly put on those gloves, how often they should change the gloves and the mask and things like that. I believe there's actually CDC guidelines for that as well. Yes.
Chuck, if I can get, the mayor is trying to join. If he can, and he's only joining by phone. So, Mayor, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
All right. And let me just say thank you to all of you. I've been listening on the call for a few moments here, and I think you're on the right path. The goal of our task force is not to get into the granular types of things. So Chuck is absolutely correct. We will only provide resources to the individual businesses that will give them guidance. And the CDC and the Department of Health here within Florida and the Department of Health within Orange County, they are formulating guidelines that we will simply annotate in our preparation for businesses because there are some businesses who are looking for additional guidance on those types of granular types of things. And so, but everything that you all have said, I think in terms of the process that you're using is precisely what I envision this group doing. So thank you for what you're doing. We got a lot of work I know to do this week. I'm sure Roseanne Harrington, my chief of staff, kind of mentioned to you that for me, if we are able to, by the end of the week, have some type of projection for the timeline of reopenings ambitious, but we do depend somewhat on the state having their recommendations in order, because we really don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're in conflict at all. So it is my understanding from the governor's senior staff persons that they will have something within the next day or so. So we're just kind of waiting on that at this point.
Mayor Demings, this is Chuck. I have a question for you. If the governor lets this order expire on Thursday and throws it back to the local municipalities, since we've achieved the 2-week downtrend already, would it be your thoughts to open up, like Monday, May 11th? Because the businesses, we talked earlier, to get the personal protection equipment, face masks, sanitizer, the gloves, all the different things they're going to need to operate in a safe environment, it's going to take them a week to 10 days, some of them maybe even longer, to get prepared. And I know local businesses are wanting to know a date they can start to aim for so they can hire staff back and they can plan that. So if the governor throws it back to you and says, my order is going to expire and I'm going to let the local municipalities figure, I don't know what he's going to do. I wish he would telegraph that a little bit. But if he does that, what are you thinking the timeline is for Orange County?
A couple of key things. First, it has to be tied to the health data, and so we'll take some guidance there. However, I think that it's probably, I agree with you that if we set a date as arbitrarily, let's say May 11th, that's kind of like less than 2 weeks. I think that's probably a bit too ambitious, because we do want to make certain that the timing of the ability of businesses to reopen, that they also have adequate supplies to be able to do that. And we continue to struggle a little bit in terms of the supply chain and having everything that we really need to have in regards to masks and even hand sanitizer and even other basic things like paper products. We're continuing to struggle with that. As the week goes forward, I believe that picture becomes clearer. I don't want to arbitrarily set a date, but generally speaking, I think that there may be some within a 2 to 3 week period of time. Once we, as a task force, decide that this is the target date, I think everyone then breathes somewhat of sigh of relief, and they understand and they begin to prepare for that. So I don't know if May 11th is the date or not. It sounds ambitious to me. Probably a later date in May or the first part of June sounds more realistic.
And Mayor Demings, we talked earlier on the call that I think we all agree that for people to feel comfort going out and for the health and safety of the community, that these businesses are going to have this PPE. And so they're going to, our guidelines, hopefully we can finish those. Our goal is by the end of the week that businesses can start to prepare, whether you're a restaurant opening, whether it's 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks or 4 weeks from now, that you're going to be able to start acquiring those things. And even if a business can't acquire them, they shouldn't be able to necessarily go open up, but we shouldn't require, business A to have it and they open up and act with the protocol, and business B didn't, whether they didn't make the effort or they just couldn't get it. The community is going to want to know that these standards are kind of applied across the board for where they're going out, so they know they're safe. So the sooner we get the guidelines out to the businesses and they know they have to open under those guidelines, I think is going to be helpful for them. And I agree with you that the date should be data driven, and the national guidelines already show a 2 week downward trend. So are we elongating that so they can get PPE, or are we just coming up with different data?
I don't know that we want to be precise in what we do, and you all have a number of more hours at least collectively to kind of debate the issues, and with some guidance from our healthcare experts, you will have to come up with your best recommendation about that. Now, trust that concurrent to what you're doing, I am certainly trying to do everything that I can to work within the system, within the available supply chain to get supplies into our community as quickly as possible, because consumer confidence is going to be very key. While businesses desire to reopen, the public, my sense of it is going to demand exactly what you said, Chuck. They're going to demand that those businesses have some type of sanitary protocols in place. Otherwise, they won't shop there. They're going to demand that employees of those businesses, in some regard, do certain things. They want to demand that the public does certain things. And so where that happy balance is for the collective thought process of the leaders that we have engaged here to tell us how to do that. Because I do think that part of the preparation for reopening, we have to run somewhat of a public marketing kind of campaign to get people to trust that this is the right thing. Now, I saw a poll regarding the reopening in Georgia that was done, and like 3/4 of the people there felt like they opened too soon. They have no consumer confidence because they made a decision and they opened quickly. So there's a little bit of a backlash going on there with only 25% of the people thinking that it was the right timing. So for us, we do have to bring them along with trusted leadership in the community, communicating to them that it's okay, that we have done our job and been judicious in looking at everything, and to trust that these things will be in place. Now, that does not mean, I hear you clearly, that some businesses may have the opportunity to open faster because they simply have everything in place. Not all businesses are created equal. Some businesses already have been able to go out and secure through various means of supplies. And the other thing that I'm a little concerned about is the fraud that's going on. There's some products that are being introduced into the marketplace that have not really have no FDA certification, hasn't been approved, and so the scam artists are very active as well. And so, somehow I think the guidelines, it is the responsibility of the public health officials to ensure that there are some regulatory oversight for what hits the marketplace. Because if you put stuff out there and it doesn't work, it's just a waste of time, it doesn't protect people, then what we run the risk of is a resurgence of the virus because we were not diligent in our public health responsibilities. So all of that, I think, has to play into what we're talking about at this point. And the state, I understand that the governor today made a trip to the White House. I'm sure he's trying to use whatever influence that he can to access for the state of Florida federal stockpiles of protective equipment. But we all across the nation at one time are kind of in that same kind of demand cycle to get product. And quite frankly, I don't think the legitimate manufacturers have been able to keep up with that. And so there has to be a dose of reality sprinkled into the equation as well. But I remain optimistic that probably at the very soonest, a couple of weeks for certain types of businesses, but a more realistic look might be a 3 to 4 week period of time. But whatever that ends up being the recommendation of this body, I'm going to accept what the body recommends and then go from there. So, if that ends up being the 1st of June, our numbers are flattening, but we still do have new cases every day, and the goal is to get that to 0 new cases every day and to have it sustained for a period of time and have that mirror the time period for reopening the businesses, knowing that we're at that very, very low mark, and we want to keep it at that very, very low mark. We don't want to see any type of a resurgence there. What I think helps consumer confidence is the testing. So this week, I said one of the 3 priorities that I had, and probably the top priority, was to increase testing. So as more people are tested and they get comfortable with, okay, I've been tested, I know, and that doesn't create a panacea where that doesn't mean you can't get infected afterwards, but I believe it gives them some assurance that there aren't a lot of people walking around in our community that are infected and perhaps can spread the disease to others. And so if we increase the testing, consumer confidence goes up with individuals. I think the emotional aspect of this is something that we have to deal with as well, and we bring people along emotionally to have the confidence that they're not sick themselves if they're asymptomatic.
Yeah, Mayor, that's a good point on the testing. I met with last week the group that's in all the Lake County testing, and I've offered them to do the testing at the Starflyer ride and International Drive. We're trying to get them to come up this weekend. They were doing 1,000 tests a day in Lake County, and I had all my employees who get tested for the coronavirus and the antibodies. And so I agree with you on that. I also agree with you that let's see what the governor comes out with this week and see if he provides us a lead to follow versus creating our own lead. And lastly, I have a question for you about the personal protection equipment. Through the different businesses that I have, we've gone on the internet to buy from companies these masks, the gloves, the sanitizer, and things like that. When you talk about trying to secure those for the county, how does that actually work where it goes, where you secure something and it actually gets in the hands of businesses that they're able to purchase these things versus going through one of those suppliers or through the internet?
What we do with the county, if we get supplies in primarily through the state, and in some cases we go through our procurement processes and we receive it, and then we redistribute it to hospitals, to first responder agencies, that's fire and EMS types of entities, and in some cases we redistribute it out into the market space. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of supplies to be able to redistribute in the marketplace. So the priority has been on those frontline workers to make sure that they have what they need in order to serve others. So that's where our priority has been. This week, we probably are increasing our level of testing within Orange County alone threefold compared to what we have been doing in weeks up to this point. So we want to kind of saturate the community with a lot of testing, and simultaneous, we are working to make sure that we have adequate supplies. So yes, there are people who are selling stuff on the internet, and a lot of businesses are going through that route. I just only offer them a lot of caution because of the scam artists that's been occurring. The Department of Justice, the FBI, the federal agencies have been really busy because in some cases individuals have paid money in advance and they didn't get the product, or what they got was something that wasn't certified by any entity. And then they're in this loop of where cash is tight of trying to figure out how do we get our money back. So all of that is, it's my understanding that there's some vetting going on of the legitimate businesses and websites, et cetera, that part of what we may be able to do, again, is provide the linkage, the information for how you can determine if it's legitimate. All of those are the things that we have to provide the businesses so that they can open up appropriately and then develop their own guidelines for their specific businesses. So Chuck, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. So will that task force that's working on the PPE provide different links or sources that business owners throughout Central Florida will be able to go to source these supplies? And I'm sure most business owners are nimble, they're going to figure it out on their own, but if that task force is able to supply the sources or links to those businesses, I'm sure that's going to be helpful for that. And just one thing to tell you, Mayor, and everybody else here, is that my wife and daughter yesterday, they went and got tested at Quest, Metro West and on Turkey Lake Road. Quest Diagnostics has tons of open appointments, and they're doing the antibody test. And we didn't even know they were doing them here in Central Florida yet. But they've got the FDA-approved antibody test that they are administering.
Yeah, they started, and you'll see more of that starting, I think, this week and in the coming weeks. Again, that's where the healthcare experts are trying to, understand the virus and the antibodies as they develop antivirals, et cetera, because we're a ways away from the development of a vaccine. So what we're doing is simply buying time, and if they understand the serology behind the antibody research, they're able to understand how to treat the disease. So if you get infected, how do you treat it? And so all of that is something that they're preparing for that will help us if there's a secondary wave during the winter months or sometime after this particular wave has subsided. They want to be able to treat in a more holistic way with known, precise medical treatment options, and so that's why they're beginning the antibody testing. So all of that is a very comprehensive, I think, World Health strategy that is moving quickly here within the United States and here within Florida.
Great. Mayor, thank you for your leadership. Does anybody else have any questions for the Mayor?
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for again, and we'll be talking to you later this week.
Thank you, Mayor. Take care. Does anybody else have any other questions? Tomorrow morning at 9, we'll do our next meeting. And if anybody circulates anything to Eric today, I know he gets up early and he goes to bed late because I get his emails at those times and read them. So anything we get, we'll work on. And if anybody's got any questions or anything before we depart. Seeing none, I'll see you all tomorrow at 9 a.m. Take care.